Today, we're super excited because we get to install our new ProPride hitch. ProPride comes with a very extensive installation manual. So first thing we'll need to do, we're going to have to remove and prep the tongue area of the trailer and get some measurements from the truck and the trailer. So we'll start by doing that. In preparation for the installation, we're going to remove the propane cylinder cover and propane cylinders. Okay, now that you got the propane cylinders removed, this is a good opportunity to fix any chips in the paint, fix any rust, or repair anything that needs to be repaired on the tongue before we start. Being that this is a brand new trailer, it's in good shape, so we don't have to worry about doing any of that. But what we will do at this point is we will establish our measurements that the manual requires us to have on the tongue so that we can do the installation. Okay, one of the most important things to the installation is to make sure that we get all of our measurements. We're going to need to get measurements on the truck and on the trailer. We'll measure from the back of the trailer, front of the trailer, make sure we're level, and we need to get wheel height all the way around. And it gives us a place in the manual to write all those measurements. So we'll need a tape measure. I'm going to use a Sharpie Magic marker and some blue painter's tape in order to make our marks and give us a place to write those. We'll also need to get the hitch box height and the trailer ball height so that we can establish the difference between the two in order to set up the stinger bar. So we're going to do that now. We're going to get the measurements off the truck and the measurements off the trailer, but we'll start with the truck. All right, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to put a piece of blue painter's tape on the truck, and we'll use that to write our measurement on and a line so we don't have to remember anything. We're doing. So we're going to measure from level ground to a mark on the trailer, on the truck, and 46 inches. That's what we'll use for that one. These lines or these measurements will be used to set up the weight distribution portion of the hitch after the hitch is installed. We'll be able to tell how much the back of the truck goes down versus how much the front of the truck goes up, so that when we add the weight distribution to it, we can readjust it to get these numbers back as close as we can. All right, we're also going to need to get a measurement from the ground to the top of the hitch receiver here. So we'll take a tape measure from the ground to the top of the hitch receiver, and that measurement looks like it's 20 3/4 inches. So we'll take that and record that measurement in the manual here. It's 20 3/4 inches. Okay, next we need to make sure that the trailer is level. The way we're going to do that is we're going to establish a measurement from the bottom of the frame in the front of the trailer and the bottom of the frame in the back of the trailer. So we'll measure from the ground to the bottom frame edge is 19 1/4 inches in the front. And we'll go to the back and we'll make that measurement again. All right, and we're going to check that measurement in the back from the ground to the bottom of the frame, and we have 19 1/4 inches. So those match. That means the trailer is level. Okay, so to establish the measurements for the hitch bar, We've already established that it's 20 3/4 inches from the ground to the top of the receiver. Now we need to measure from the ground to the top of the ball to get the trailer ball height. All right, so from the ground to an eyeball level spot, the top of the ball is 23 inches. So our ball height will be 23 inches. All right, we're going to talk about the hitch portion of the ProPride setup. A lot of people get hung up on setting up this hitch bar, and it's really not that hard. There's a little bit of math involved in it, and you got to make sure that you've got good measurements to do it. But the first thing let's establish is which holes we use in this bar. This is the hitch side of the bar. This is the part that actually goes inside the truck, and it can be established, or it can be installed either this way or this way based on your measurements, and that would be considered plates down or plates up. So then what you have is you have two pivot holes and you have two pivot pin holes. And the way this works is this pivot pin, they recommend starting with 2 washers on it. This pivot pin will always go in the top hole. So if you're installing your hitch with the plates down, it would go in this hole. If you were installing it with the plates up, it would go in this hole. This pin here always goes in the top hole. And then for the pivot bolt, it will always go in the bottom hole. So if you're installing plates up, it goes in the bottom hole. If you're installing plates down, it will go in the bottom hole. So let's just make sure that everybody understands that. The pin always goes in the top hole, whether it's this top or that top. And the bolt goes in the bottom hole, whether it's this bottom or that bottom. Okay, so now we're going to use the measurements that we took earlier to determine whether we're going to install our hitch receiver side with the plates facing down or the plates facing up. So let's look at these numbers and see what we come up with. So we've established that our hitch height for the truck is 20 3/4 inches and the trailer ball height is 23 inches. And they give us a nice worksheet to work off of here. And it says you determine your tow vehicle receiver height, which we have at 20 3/4. We determine the ball height at 23. The hitch box height for the actual ProPride receiver head is 5.5 inches lower than your trailer ball height. So we'll need to subtract 5.5 inches from the 23 inches and we get 17.5 inches. And then we're going to determine whether that number is greater than or equal to our hitch box height or less than. In our case, our hitch height is 20 3/4 inches. The hitch box height is 17.5, which means we are greater than or equal to the hitch box number. So then we're going to use steps 4A and 4B. So we come over here, this is step A, and it says if that difference in the number is 4 inches or more, then we're going to place them with the plates down. If it is less than 4 inches, we're going to install it with the plates up. So if we subtract 17.5 from 23 3/4, we get a number of 3 1/4 inches. So 3 1/4 inches is less than 4. So we would come down here for less than 4, and that means that we're going to install our plates in the up position. Okay, so what we've got is we've determined that we need to install our hitch receiver in with the plates facing upward. So I've kind of got it mocked up here how it's going to go, and what we're measuring is that 3 1/4 inch difference. So from the top of the receiver we're going to establish a straight line here and then to the top of the stinger. We want to check it, and we're right at 3 1/4 inches there. So this would be the holes that we would use. Now this can also be established by ProPride has given us a guide that shows us, and we knew our difference was 3 1/4, which falls between 2 1/2 and 3 1/2. And if you look, the picture will show you exactly where the bolts go. So it looks like ours is plates up with 1 hole exposed at the top. Okay, so let's install these two guys together. So again, remember, this pivot pin always goes in the top hole. We're installing ours with the plates up, therefore pin goes in the top hole here. Now, we'll slide these together. The pivot bolt goes in the bottom hole. And we're going to slide it up so that we get our 1 hole exposed here at the top. And then we're just going to put it together. There's a washer that goes on this side. A washer that goes on this side. And then the nut. There. And then the bottom hole. There's a washer that goes on this side. A washer that goes on this side. And then the nut. Okay. I'm going to show you what this pivot pin does is when we apply weight distribution to the hitch, it'll stop the hitch from continuing to pivot upward. So this can be adjusted to change the angle of the stinger. But right now they recommend 2 washers, so that's what we've got in there. So we'll get all of this tightened up, and then we'll be able to put this in the back of the truck and determine if the stinger is level with the ground or not. If it is aiming in the down position, we would need to take a washer out. If it's in the up position, we want to push it back down. We may add a washer here. But this is just a rough guideline to get started. We use 2 washers. Okay, so once the hitch is on the back of the truck, the ultimate goal is for this stinger to be level. So what you'll do is if you pull up on it, it should be close to level at this point. And that would be where these washers that are on this pivot control pin here come into play. The number of washers you have there will affect the angle. So right now we're going to leave it where it is. We may need to fine tune adjust it later, but it's close to being within the lines. I don't think the truck sits level without any weight on it anyway, so we'll have to look at it once we get everything in place and see how it looks. Okay, let's do a recap of what we've done so far. So we've established our measurements all the way around the truck. We've established our measurements on the trailer, establishing the hitch height, establishing the ball height, using the manual to formulate our measurement or calculate our measurements to determine where we needed to be as far as mounting the stinger to the hitch assembly. We've got that done. We've got everything snugged up. It's not super tight at this point, but it's firm enough that it won't move. We'll tighten everything else up once we make final adjustments. Okay, so now what we're going to do is go back over to the trailer and we will mount the weight distribution jacks and the frame bracket. Okay, so we're going to establish the measurements for the weight distribution jacks, which will mount to the frame. That measurement is 26 inches along the A-frame from the center of the ball to our 26-inch mark. we'll have plus or minus an inch and a half. So there's a 3-inch window where that jack can go. The reason it needs to be within that 3-inch window is because you want it pulling straight up and down on the weight distribution spring bar when you raise or lower it. You don't want it way back here where it's pulling at an angle, or way up here where it's pulling at an angle. So what we'll do is we'll establish the 26-inch mark here, and then we'll have to determine where it falls in line with our propane tank cover to make sure we don't have any interference between the jack and the cover. So let's get our mark here. We'll find the center of the ball. We'll come back to 26 inches. Make a mark, and then we're going to go to the other side of the trailer. Do exactly the same thing, finding the center of the ball. And 26 inches. Okay, so we've established our 26-inch mark here, and I can already see we're going to have a little bit of an issue because the cross member for the battery box falls within that 26-inch mark. But remember, I said we had plus or minus an inch and a half, so we can go an inch and a half back. Obviously, we can't go an inch and a half forward because we'll be in the propane area. So we're going to grab one of the jacks, put it on here, and try to establish where our mounting point will be, keeping it within the inch and a half margin, and then we'll check for interference with the propane cover. So let me grab a jack and we'll look at that. Okay, I've got one of the weight distribution jacks here, and it's saddled over the A-frame. And what I've determined is that I am going to have to come back to the 27.5-inch mark, which I've marked here. That's an inch and a half behind the 26. And what you're measuring to is this leading edge of the jack, the very front edge. So if we slide this jack to that 27.5-inch mark right there, I've determined that we can mount it here, and won't have any interference with the propane cover, and we're within our 1.5 inches of play that we have for the jack. Okay, so what we've done on this side is we've established this is our 26-inch mark, which is the factory mark they told us to, or the standard mark. And then we have an inch and a half in either direction. Obviously forward we can't go. We're going to have to go backwards to allow clearance for this bar and for the propane cover. So what we'll do is we'll simply saddle the jack over and have it right on the 27.5-inch line there. Now these measurements will vary trailer to trailer. This is my Airstream, and these are the numbers I'm having to use. You may have other things in place. A battery box may be different, may not have a battery box here. Propane may be in a different spot too, but for us, we're within the 1.5-inch margin they give us, and we've got good clearance for everything. Okay, so we just did a quick mock-up. We put the propane cover back on and mounted the weight distribution jack. Here we are at our 27.5-inch mark, and you can see we've got plenty of clearance for the cover there. I think this will work, giving us plenty of gap between the propane cover and it. So that's where we'll mount them, is there. Okay, so these weight distribution jacks will mount to the A-frame using a U-bolt. That's how it works. But they also provide you with a spacer plate that needs to go in here. And this is because there's different thicknesses of trailer frames, and for ours it'll require that we use this spacer. It'll go on the inside of the A-frame and give us the space that we need between it. They also provide you with some long bolts and short bolts. These long bolts are for if your trailer has a C-channel type frame, on the short bolts are if it's a solid tubular frame. Ours is a solid tubular frame, so we'll use the short bolts, but what we will do is we will use the nuts off of the long bolts as a swedge bolt to prevent these from coming undone once installed. So this goes up like that, and then we'll put this bolt in here, and it will go through the shim tighten against the frame. And these just are snugged up, and you give it a quarter turn, and then the U-bolt will hold everything in place. So we'll go ahead and mount the spacer in position. We've got the nut in place. So this thing should fit nice and snug. What we want to do is just be careful. Try to slide it to our 27-inch mark and lock it down into position. There. Okay. All right, so now that we've got the weight distribution jack in place, we're going to tighten this bolt in the back. And again, it is just a snug it up and then give it a quarter turn to get it good and tight. So we'll make sure we get it good and finger tight there. A little tighter in there. Okay, there it is. And quarter turn. All right, good deal. And then I'm going to tighten up this swedge bolt on the back that we added, which will add a little bit of locking potential to that bolt so it doesn't move. Okay, so that's done. Now we'll need to mount the U-bolt. You may notice here I have a propane line coming down the bottom of the A-frame. It's not a major issue. We should be able to go under that propane line like so. And come up through just like that. And then you've got a washer and a lock washer and a nut on this side. And the same on the other side. We'll have a washer, a lock washer, and a nut. Got it. All right, so once the U-bolt is hand tight, we're going to tighten it with a 9/16 inch deep well socket. The manual says don't put any more than 30 pounds of torque on these because you don't want this U-bolt to bend under the bottom of the frame. So they basically just, the weight of the spring bar pulling down on it holds it in position, so you shouldn't have a problem. So what you want to do is just tighten these up until they're good and snug. Just kind of feel it. That's there. Okay, now what we're going to do is do the same thing with the other jack on the other side. Some paint that gets inside the threads on this thing, so it's kind of difficult to get this bolt going here, but it does go. It's just paint in the threads. Make sure the shim is straight. And again, it's just finger tight and a quarter turn. That's all you're trying to get on it. We're going to give it about an 1/8 and about an 1/8, and that's it. And we'll tighten that swedge nut up. And it gets a little bit more. So it'll go up to there. Kind of put a little on that one. All right, and then the same scenario with the U-bolt. Take all this off this side. We don't have a propane line to deal with on this side, so it's a little bit easier to kind of slide the U-bolt up through. And then we'll grab a washer, lock washer, and a nut. Oops. And then a washer, a lock washer, and a nut. And then again, these are tightened down with a 9/16 inch deep well socket, and they don't need any more than 30 foot-pounds on them because you don't want to bend the U-bolt around the bottom of the frame. Something just to remember too, these are our marks. The mark is for the leading edge of the jack. So we're marking it and we're making sure they're in place there. Okay, now we're going to talk about mounting the frame bracket. This is the yoke part of the hitch. This is kind of what makes ProPride unique from the other brand. The other brand uses a torsion bar type deal to secure the hitch head to the trailer and prevent it from pivoting. ProPride uses this yoke, and this mounts to the pivot, to the hitch head, and locks it in place, preventing it from turning on the ball. This prevents it. The way it does is it would try to turn this way, and then this frame bracket will go under the frame and sit like that, and that will prevent the yoke from being able to turn. So we're going to mount this to the underneath side of the frame next. So we'll get right to that. Okay, so in mounting the frame bracket, we'll do the same type measurement we did for the weight distribution jacks, but the measurement is 22 inches. So we will measure from the center of the ball along the frame rail to 22 inches. I'm going to get that measurement lower. Okay, so we established a 22-inch mark. I'm going to use a square to transfer that mark to the bottom of the frame edge here, so we can have it. And then we'll have to do the same thing on the other side. We'll come around over here, and we'll measure from the center of the ball to 22 inches. Take a square and transfer that mark to the bottom of the frame. The tolerance for this measurement is a 1/2 inch. So what we'll do when we mount the frame bracket underneath is we will snug it up, but we will not torque it or tighten it up completely, because we won't have the final position of it until the hitch head and the yoke are in place. So these are just going to get us in the general area, and then we'll be able to adjust it once the yoke is mounted to the hitch head. Okay, so the frame bracket is actually mounted to the bottom of the frame and it's going to be held in position with U-bolts. Our propane tank tray was mounted to the top of the tongue here. It was down, it was flush. So you had two options. One would be to remove and raise the propane tank tray so that the U-bolt would fit under it, or it would be to drill holes through the propane tank tray, allowing the U-bolt to pass through and bolt it down. We chose to raise the propane tank tray, and the way we did that was there's 4 bolts that hold it in place. I removed these 4 bolts and I added spacer washers underneath, and I did this previous to the install in interest of time so that I could actually paint all of this and it would be dry through the installation process. So the way it's going to work is we're actually going to take this U-bolt and we will slide it under, and then it will come down like so. So there's a gap between the propane tank tray and the A-frame of the trailer that allows that U-bolt to pass through there now because of the spacer washers we added. Okay, same thing on this side. We're going to simply pass the U-bolt through the gap and it will fall down and be able to come back into position. We still got this pesky propane line to deal with, but I believe we'll be able to move it down and slide the frame bracket just above it, and it'll sit like that. So that's the plan. Again, we're going to just finger tighten this thing up to the frame because we don't actually know its final installation position until the yoke is installed. And since there's only a 1/2 inch of margin forward to backwards, we don't need to tighten anything up until we make sure we've got it where we need it to be. So I'm just going to finger tighten it like that for now. Go to the other side and do the same thing. Missing a lock washer.
It's right there.
Probably speed a lot of this up anyway, so. All right, that's that. Perfect. Okay, we've got the stinger and hitch bar on the truck. We're ready to mount the main hitch assembly to the trailer. The way we're going to do that is I'm actually going to install the main hitch assembly onto the stinger bar, and then we'll back the truck up to the trailer, and we'll set the trailer on the ball just like you were hooking it up to a standard hitch, but this time we'll set it on the ball for the last time. So we'll get that set up, and I'm going to probably want to get some help for this part here, but I'm just going to manhandle it. It's not too bad. Just set it on there like that. We'll lock it on. And drop these in place. And there it is. It's all secure. So now we'll back up to the trailer and we'll set the set the hitch on the ball. So next step in the instruction manual is to grease the ball. Whoa. After the trailer coupler is lowered onto the hitch head assembly, it's time to install the weight distribution spring bars. This is done by removing the retaining bracket, inserting the spring bar after it is greased, and then tightening the retaining bolt. Here you can see the weight distribution spring bar retaining bracket being removed. You'll notice there's a small retaining disc that is used to hold the weight distribution spring into the retaining bracket. Insert that into the slot and then use a little grease to help hold it in place while you reinsert the spring bar into the bottom of the hitch head. That's it. You just tighten these up firm. There are grease zerks on these things, so you can pump grease into them periodically as needed. But it's a good idea just to grease them before you get them in there. But there you go. Both the spring bars are installed. Okay, now so that we've got the weight distribution springs in place and we've got the weight distribution jacks in place, we need to put the weight distribution links in place. And that's these metal bars that link the jack to the spring, and they recommend that you start in the center hole. So we'll go center hole here, bring around, and you've got a U-bolt that goes through the spring there, and 2 nylon lock nuts that go on the bottom, and they just need to be tightened up to the point that the nylon is well locked in. Just so I can see a thread or two through the bottom is all I'm after. All right, so that one's secure. We'll go to the other side and do the same thing. Okay, so same thing on this side. Spring bar is connected. Weight distribution jack's connected. We need to put the link in between it. We'll go to the middle hole, swing it around. We have the U-bolt. Passes through there. I'll need to pass the U-bolt through the spring. And then these nylon lock nuts, again, all we're trying to do is make sure we got thread coming through the bottom. So we'll start that one there. Start this one here. Just a second thread coming through the bottom there. All right, so now the final part of, or the last piece we got to put on this thing is this yoke. We got to mount it. First thing we need to do is remove all of these 3/4 inch bolts, taking into account the orientation and order of the hardware, and leaving the bushing in place. So we're going to remove the nut. You'll note we have a nut, we have a split lock washer, a washer, and then on this side we have a washer on the bolt head side. So we need to keep all of that stuff in order. Our space will be between the washers. There's a steel bushing with a brass follower inside there. That needs to stay in place. Same thing on this side. And a washer. Split ring lock washer. All of those. And leaving the steel bushing in place. Remove all those hardware. All right, in order to install the yoke, we need to remove this hitch plate cover. It's a couple of 3/4 inch bolts underneath here. Take out. This plate also has to be removed if you ever use the lot bar. There's a thing called a lot bar which allows you to drop your trailer off at an RV dealer and they can tow it with just a regular ball. You have to remove this plate in order to install a stop block. But right now we're just going to remove it, set it aside so that we can install the yoke. Okay, so let's look at how the yoke will assemble to the hitch head. And what you've got is you've got a welded in stop block here that will stop the nut from turning, allowing you to tighten the bolt. How it goes together is, if you'll remember here, you've got your bolt head, there's a washer on this side, your yoke bushing will go between a washer, and that all goes on the outside of the assembly. Then you've got this lock washer that you've got to slide in behind this welded on stop block there, and then this will tighten into place, and that will allow you to be able to tighten that bolt without that nut turning. All right, the next step in order to get the hitch aligned and get the yoke tail into the frame bracket is we're going to need to disconnect the truck from the hitch, and the reason is because right now we're at a slight angle and we can't turn the hitch head to get it to line up because it's still connected to the truck. So we're going to disconnect the truck. The way you do that is you're looking for this slack right here. I'm going to raise it back up. You can see the ball coming up right here. But when you disconnect, what we're looking for is we're looking for that slack. So we're going to let it come down, 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 down. Watch it. There it went. You saw the hitch move. Do it one more time. Going down, you'll see the hitch. Okay, so now we're going to put the yoke tail into the frame bracket here, and we've adjusted this frame bracket best we can with a tape measure, making sure it's kind of centered on the trailer. And now what we'll do is we just pick this guy up here. It should go up. Looks like we're going to have to move it forward some, which is okay. Yeah, we're going to need to pull that thing forward a little bit. Hold what you got. Again, this is why we didn't firmly secure this guy in place until you have the yoke in place. It's because you know you're going to have to adjust it. So it goes in like that. And you've got a bolt along with a roller that it sits on, like so. And a nut that goes on this side here. And that keeps this yoke from moving back and forth, which prevents the hitch head from rotating on the ball. Right, now that we've got the frame bracket and yoke in place, we're going to tighten up the U-bolts that hold the frame bracket to the A-frame. They got a torque spec too, and we'll torque those accordingly, but right now I'm just firming them up with a wrench so that they're good and tight. All right, one thing I want to kind of point out is on the frame bracket here where the yoke tail goes in to the frame bracket, initially without this bolt tight, this thing would kind of rattle back and forth inside here. What you want to do is you want to tighten this bolt up and kind of crush this in so that you can hear it rattling just a fuzz. But you want it to where it doesn't move back and forth. Before it would move back and forth probably 1/8 of an inch. So by squeezing these in a little bit, makes that tighter, kind of helps secure that head from being able to pivot on the ball. It's got to be straighter, it moves too much. All right, we're going to torque these bolts to 60 foot-pounds. Alright, so we'll tighten the U-bolts for the frame bracket to 55 foot-pounds. That's quite a bit of torque for wow. So now we're going to torque these big 3/4 inch bolts for the yoke to 175 foot-pounds. Okay, so one of the 3/4 inch, or one of these bolts, on these 3/4 inch bolts, the nut is spinning against the welded in stop tab. So we're going to take a flathead screwdriver and swedge it between the stop tab and the nut. That should give us enough if we get it in there right. Should give us the ability to torque this thing. Close. So there we go. All right, so now that we've got all this torqued, everything's all in position and done, we'll replace the hitch head cover. Just this piece goes like that. These 3/4 inch bolts hold it into place. In there. And And just tighten it up in place here. And that should do it. All right, 200 foot-pounds on the hitch. More time. All right, so that should do it for the install. All we got to do now is hook the truck back to the trailer, get everything on some flat ground, and adjust our weight distribution.